Thanks for gathering here. Thanks to the Commission to come to present the Innovation Fund and more in general in relation to energy storage. My name is Patrick Clarence. I'm representing EASE, which is the European Association for Storage of Energy. And obviously we have a certain interest in the storage topic. And I'm very happy to see so many here around. And we have also on the webinar a lot of people, so it will be streamed. It's possible to log in and to see the slides and to hear the sound, not to see the faces. But we'll see today the agenda is quite straightforward. And it should normally go to the next slide, which is not happening. Maybe you can do it manually.
It's fine.
We have first a presentation from Roman on the Innovation Fund, and then we'll have some Q&A afterwards. And this is followed by some short presentation from our side, from EASE, on the storage topics, and maybe show you how what the challenges are, or one of the main challenges related to this. There will be some presentation following on these different parts on from Gator, from hydropower, and also from Iberdrola. And then there will be some open discussion and questions and clarification of all the points which were not clear. Maybe in a general context, this afternoon there's an expert workshop, tomorrow morning another expert workshop, and it will go more into the details on how the Innovation Fund will be evaluating and finding the costs. And then tomorrow afternoon is a public session, which is also streamed, where people can participate and look at basically a kind of information sharing again tomorrow afternoon. So this is about the next days. So we are in 2 Innovation Fund days, where we get all the intelligence packed into one room for 2 days. So with this, I will not keep you busy with me, and I will have Roman ask him to come forward in a moment. He's Deputy Head of Unit in DG Klima, and he was one, not the only, because there are more people, was one of the drivers for this Innovation Fund since the beginnings, and it was identified in the EU ETS, and we have a lot of colleagues obviously who worked on this also with him.
Yeah.
So the floor is yours. If you're done, are you done? Or you need a minute? That's fine. Just finish and then do a step forward. But I now don't know what to tell anymore. Maybe as a general information, but you should be aware the Innovation Fund is the following, or if you like, from the new entrance reserve 300, NEF 300, which was in the previous EU ETS training period, an attempt to put money aside and to have this money used for innovative projects. It was in this time CCS mainly and innovative renewables. This was the discussion. And we learned a lot from this first period, so we want to use these learnings now in the second period. Roman, thank you. The floor is all yours.
Thanks a lot. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen.
Normally, otherwise
it's really a pleasure that we managed in a very short time to organize this meeting. Energy storage is one of, let's say, the more challenging sectors that the Innovation Fund will address. And hence we have this workshop and the specific discussion going on today and tomorrow about the emission prevalence calculation and the relevant cost calculation methodologies, which will impact your applications and your projects in the future. I'm also accompanied by colleagues, by Maria, who is the mother of the Innovation Fund, and Oscar, Timo, and our consultants, Karsten and Serge, who are helping us with the methodology, and Sasha and so this is the team behind the development. And there are more people, obviously, but at least those that managed to come today. I will skip through the blah blah part, but just to kind of frame the Innovation Fund, where it comes from, where it sits. You also, and I hope also read our strategy for carbon neutral Europe by 2050. I think this is a key piece of work which determines all the related and linked policy initiatives, whether it is the Green Deal, whether it is Sustainable Investment Plan, and whether it is the climate law and its related legislative framework that is coming during this new Commission. The objective is clearly to ensure that we manage to keep competitive while protecting the planet. And finding the ways how this can be done. Why does that work?
It's voice controlled.
Okay. Okay. And the paper, the analysis come to the conclusion that it is feasible, it is economically doable, it is technologically possible, provided that we manage to put in the market in the coming decade technologies that cannot be put on the market under normal terms. And we need to support those technologies that really will make material change in the coming years to come. There are 7 areas identified by the strategy. It is clear that the combination of those in function of territory, in function of technological options, will need to be looked at. The strategy doesn't put as its objective to regulate which technology is the winning one or which solution is the winning one. Rather, it outlines the possibilities and calls on stakeholders to find the best combinations and ways how those technological solutions or pathways could be used in practice. The long-term strategy shows where we need to get by 2050, and it looks very challenging, but it is doable. It is possible because we already see how quickly the solutions can be put in the market once there is a right framework. Look at the renewables, look at the storage. I mean, this is the sector that is really moving very dynamically forward. Look at the smart solutions, the peak shaving solutions. I mean, these things all will need to be integrated in the wider concept, in the wider market with industry, with energy producers, and we see quite a dynamic movement out there. Also, these workshops and all the workshops that we organized last year confirmed that there is a huge interest in the industry. There is quite a dynamic interest in coming up and be the first to demonstrate the technologies and gain the economic benefits from that fact of being the first. And this is why the Innovation Fund comes on stream. The European Green Deal, I think, is, I just put the slide here to show how the magnitude of change in policymaking in Europe. I mean, a couple of years ago, climate policy was always somehow in the back room. It was understood that it is important, but it was rather seen as something that is in conflict with competitiveness, with innovation, with markets. This is completely changed with the Green Deal communication and all the proposals tabled. It becomes a new paradigm. The greening of the system in all economic sectors, in all our activities, and even addressing the consumer habits and the way how ordinary people can change their ways and hence impact the climate is something that is unprecedented. We are keen to see this because this puts DigiClimate on the spotlight, of course. On the other hand, we are also very aware about the responsibility related to that. And we are trying to find solutions and the policy framework, which will, on one hand side, enable that shift. On the other hand, mirrored by the financing that should come, and probably you have seen the Sustainable Investment Plan, which puts this in the framework from the investment point of view. So this is let's say the key policy background and framework, which I think fits very well the Innovation Fund. We had organized so far, this is more, we had done 30, in fact, we just recalculated, workshops with all the sectors concerned and in the member states. So we did quite a traveling exercise last year. Yes, our carbon footprint is rather high, but that's why we are trying to reduce it by good investments from the fund. What we have found in those discussions in each and every sector is that there are technological solutions available. There are already activities happening in the sectors in different magnitude, in different speed, with different challenges. And there is an interest to demonstrate these technologies and put them on the market in the coming decade. We have managed out of those workshops, based on the presentations delivered, to create the first very indicative non-binding database of more than 100 projects, which already shows that there is a dynamic background, dynamic activity on which we can build on. And this also feeds the work of our consultants and ourselves in designing the details of the call. So the Innovation Fund, financed from the ETS market, from the allowances. The idea is that the 450 million allowances are taken at the source, sold, and then the proceeds would fuel the investment by providing the support to projects in the coming 10 years. We will start already in 2020. I hope to launch the first call already in mid-2020, before summer. The volume of that call could be around 1 billion euros. So that is the volume available, and we are planning to launch the calls in the regular period, so probably every year. The Innovation Fund is there to address the part of the financing of the project that is difficult to cover on the market or from other sources. Therefore, we can cover up to 60% additional costs of the project related to the innovation that is introduced by the investment. So we cannot cover another cost, but really focus on those where you, as a project promoter, would have difficulties to find them on the market, get them from your lender, from your investors, from your owners. And we are addressing exactly that part of the risk that is the highest when you are designing your financial structure at the time when you need to come to the financial close. And the objective is really to de-risk these investments to the extent that you can complete your financial package with additional sources that will come. I say these additional sources because it is very important consideration. In traditional projects that we may see, probably the Innovation Fund will be able to cover, say, 25%, 30%. All the rest will have to come from private or public sources. And this is important because it means that the projects, when they come and ask for funding, will need to be prepared to the extent that they will be mature from the design perspective. The objective is to drive the low carbon innovative technologies to the market. We are not a research program. So it's not a program that addresses very early stage laboratory testing kind of projects. We are focusing on projects that are past this stage and are there to kick in economic terms, to operate, to generate profits, to produce their products and reduce greenhouse gas emissions in a real market environment. When it comes to the support from the Innovation Fund, so we can cover up to 60% of the additional costs, and we can cover both capital expenditure and operating. And how this works and function is set in the definition of the relevant costs. So it is the additional capex plus the net present value of the difference between operating revenues and costs compared to the counterfactual. So the traditional product or plant has to get these additional costs, of which we can cover up to 60% from the Innovation Fund, and we can cover those costs up to 10 years after entry into operation. So for projects that are facing issues with their operating revenues, this is a welcome support because they will need to have certain period of time until the market catches up and their prices will increase so that they can sell the products on market terms. We are planning to launch the first call, as I said already, in mid-2020. This is very challenging, but we are all keen to deliver. And we will focus the first call of the Innovation Fund to large-scale projects, so the projects with the capital expenditure above 7.5 million euros. We will follow up next year with the call for small-scale projects, so that we address also the smaller investment.
I just asked a question. The 7.5 million is the total capex, and then from this, the part will be funded.
Yes. This is the key criterion for if your project is bigger than 7.5 million capex, then you will be eligible for the first call. If it's smaller, then there will be another call next year.
And only the innovative portion is funded.
Yes.
Is it only capex or the total cost of the project?
For a decision whether to apply or not, it is the capex. Okay, we have learned a lot as Patrick said from the NER 300. And Maria and I were spending a lot of time in reviewing the knowledge that was coming from the project. Of the 39 projects that we supported, only 7 are operational today. And the reasons why we have very slow percentage of projects succeeding are various. One of them is that the projects were simply immature when they were awarded the grant. Second, because there were material changes in the market or regulatory framework, which impacted the profitability of these projects. And some of the projects were facing technological issues. So we learned from these experiences. We have tried to establish a system for selection of projects that will enable to evaluate the projects from the 360 degrees perspective. In the NER 300, we only looked to cost efficiency. So how much does it cost to produce a megawatt hour of green power or to reduce 1 ton of CO2? In the Innovation Fund, we are designing a system which is based on 5 selection criteria. The greenhouse gas emissions avoidance. So what is the volume of greenhouse gas emissions that the project will avoid or reduce during its operation? The degree of innovation. So how is the project innovative compared to the state of the art? How is the project relevant from the 2030, 2050 perspective when the whole system is going to decarbonize? What is the place of that project in the world that we need to reduce the resource, that we need to be increasing the efficiency? The project maturity, which I think also learning from the NER 300 is one of the very important selection criteria, meaning how ready the project design, the project components are. Who is the project promoter? How well is the financial, legal, technical structure designed? What are the risks that the projects will face? How well these risks are addressed? Are they known? Are they valued? Are they costed? So in other words, we are trying to behave as venture capital investors. So we will try to do really a deep screening of the projects in the full stage and see how those risks are addressed by the promoters. It is also protecting the promoters in the later stage. And we will, of course, try to reduce the project that will not make it, but it's innovation. So I think these things will happen anyway. The scalability criterion. So how does the project enables towards the future to increase the market share? How replicable the project is? We are using this criterion also to favor, let's say, smaller scale investments, which may seem lower significance when it comes to immediate greenhouse gas emissions. But if you look to scalability of the market in time, with the replication of the solution, probably the project will have a material impact. So this is, again, to balance between major source emissions and solutions that will be delivering their greenhouse gas emissions through operation on the market. And the cost efficiency criterion, which will again check how much does it cost, how much the project is asking for funding versus how much greenhouse gas emissions or green power the project delivers when it's in operation. We are now working on the let's say method how to set the criteria. So the methodology, the guidance, this is the subject of the discussions in these 2 technical workshops and other workshops, and how to weight the criteria, whether we weight them or not. This is still the work in progress, but the guidance with the detailed explanation will be available before or at the launch of the call.
Regarding the innovation, what do you put in innovation? Innovation, is it only technical innovation? How do you define that word?
It is also subject to further discussion because you may have a different ways how to address it. We do not only look at technology purely, but the solution as such, and compare it to the state of the art. That's the one question. So if it is a technology that is already commercially available, it will have difficulties because of this criteria. If it's not commercially available, it is aiming to be commercially available in the coming years because of this demonstration project, then we deem it as innovative. But there are more considerations, mostly related on how the project solution is coherent with our policy objectives, like the long-term strategy, like the set plan. So those technology pathways that are already naming the solutions that we will need to demonstrate in the future. Maria, did I?
No, I'm just thinking that you had this slide.
Yeah. So we will come back to it. Okay, so we are again trying to be clear in saying that the Innovation Fund is not a research program. Okay, we are not there to pay the costs of researchers in developing their papers or their solutions. We are discussing business, we are discussing investment, we are talking CapEx, OpEx, net present value, profitability, the capital side of the investment. And this already tells how much we will need projects that will be mature and doable on the market in real terms. So that's why we are looking at the technical business and financial viability of the investment. Probably, Maria, we need to say a few words on this.
Yeah. Roman already explained more or less all this, but it will be kind of a repetition, so perhaps you will understand better what we will do to select projects. So there will be two-phase applications. In the first phase, we call expression of interest. And at the expression of interest, we will look only at the first three criteria: greenhouse gas emission avoidance, degree of innovation, and project maturity. So greenhouse gas emission avoidance is one key criteria. It has, in our discussions with stakeholders, we have the confirmation that this is the most important criteria. So we're putting really a lot of emphasis on this and on the how exactly and correctly to evaluate this potential. It's very difficult for energy storage in particular, and you know better than me why. And this will be discussed already this afternoon, actually. So there are two representatives from the association which will take part in these discussions. There's a discussion paper which we've published already. So we're trying to find actually a solution which is workable, so it's not too complicated to calculate the potential for greenhouse gas emission avoidance of different projects over a period between 3 and 10 years, so the period of operation of projects. So the application should be fairly easy. The evaluation should be also possible, because one thing is what you put like as projects on the paper. Our evaluators have to be able to confirm the assumptions and what the project has calculated. And on top of it, once these projects are in operation, they will need to report that we need to be certain that greenhouse gas emissions have been avoided as planned. So it's a key criteria which we will look at the first phase and at the second phase to confirm more that this is in line with what is proposed at first phase. Degree of innovation, as Roman explained, first of all, there will be more or less a yes and no question whether technologies, whether projects are innovative in relation to the state of the art. But on top of it, there will be an evaluation of the degree of innovation, how innovative, in fact, projects are, and what Roman said, we will look, or the evaluators will look at the consistencies with our 2050 world. So where we're going to a climate neutral economy. So how are these projects going to help us reach our objectives? So this, you have a question?
Yes, sorry. If we look at the 2050 strategy and the fact that we're looking to a more decentralized, for example, energy system, does that mean that you will reward technologies that are going in that direction? Or will you simply consider them as technologies? Let me give you an example. If you have a district battery, that's a different technology than a large-scale pumping battery that we talked about. However, it could be the same technology, it's a different application. Do you reward the application? Do you reward the technology?
Well, evaluators will have to judge whether how this project actually, how innovative it is and what it will deliver on top of other technologies which are already commercially available. So the evaluation will be within sectors. This is what I should have said perhaps. So there will be scoring, and then projects will be ranked first in their sector. So all energy storage projects will be ranked first within the sector. And therefore, more innovative projects obviously will score higher. But degree of innovation is one of all selection criteria. Maybe I'll finish the explanation and then you'll have more questions. Project maturity, as Roman explained, it's very, very important for us and this time because we saw that in the previous program, NER 300, a lot of the projects were really not mature. The concepts were good. They were very innovative. In fact, they had a big promise to reduce emissions, to deliver a lot of renewable energy, but they were years before final investment decision. So this is what we want to avoid this time. And therefore, expression of interest, we will look especially at project maturity. Evaluators will look at project maturity. And those projects which are actually scoring high on potential for reducing emissions and real innovation, but are unlikely to reach final investment decision within 4 years' time, they can have the possibility for project development assistance. So this, maybe I should say, this is likely to be managed by the European Investment Bank. So those projects will be recommended to the European Investment Bank, which will actually look at the projects and see in what way they can advance the project maturity through this, what we call PDA, project development assistance. There will be projects which will be not innovative or not likely to reduce emissions, those projects will be rejected, basically. So this is the expression of interest phase. It's a full application. Projects, we will look also at scalability and cost efficiency. And scalability, as already explained, is like the market potential for these technologies once commercialized. What will they deliver in a 2050 world? So, because we are supporting innovative technologies, first of a kind demo plants, which in fact will be commercial, like wide scale after 2030, most probably. So that's why scalability is so important. We will look at expected cost reduction, and we will consider also potential resource limitations, because this can be the case for some technologies. It could be the case for hydropower, in the case for energy storage, but it is a limitation, for example, in other areas, like if they use biomass, for example, is there enough resource availability for particular type of technology which is being developed? This is the best use of biomass. Cost efficiency, of course, will be important, and it will be calculated like in the NER 300, in fact, the rental cost divided by the estimated greenhouse gas emissions avoided. So these are additional criteria. So the first three plus this will be looked at for application in detail.
Excuse me. With respect to determining what the maturity of the technology is, with energy storage in particular, it's very dependent also on external effects or external factors. How do you calculate them into the equation? Like market prices or so?
Well, this will have to come from the applicant, how the applicant is intending to deal with it. If the applicant cannot show he will be able to address this market uncertainty whatsoever, this project is not mature, then we will have, the evaluators will have to see, is it possible that we provide project development assistance to strengthen the applicant in this regard, to find a solution which will be workable on the market. In that case, because maybe indeed the project has a good potential, but it needs some strengthening on that side. In that case, maybe we can help with PDA, but maybe not. Maybe it's too immature in any case, so we'll have to reject this project.
And we are working on the guidance also to lead the framework for those calculations. Okay, so what are the assumptions? What are the, let's say, key guiding principles used? There is the not only the guidance, because it's still work in progress, but we have published it now yesterday. The two discussion papers, and they are available on our website.
They will also be distributed.
Majority, but on those questions related to which parameters which is the assumption.
So this is to recap what we just explained. So the expression of interest in the full application phases. One thing to be mentioned is that we will be consulting the member states on the list of selected projects. So before the award, it's a consultation. So the role of the member states is different from the role of the member states in the previous program. So here the idea is actually to more ask the member states to support the projects, to make them aware that these projects are going to be executed on their territory and to seek their support rather than to cancel or select projects. We don't expect this so much from the member state, unless, of course, they are aware of some circumstances which will make the project impossible to execute. So that again is actually an explanation of the first phase, what we just explained. So I want to stay on that.
Yes, and this is probably complementing. And this is the main slide that explains the process of the innovation center. So, so how we are financing projects, when, on which basis, etc. So from the delegated regulation, we can cover up to 60% of additional or relevant costs, as we call them, of the project. Those costs can be disbursed in two main buckets, let's say. One bucket is the first tranche, which is 40% of that support, which we can provide to the project before or up to the financial close. So at the moment when the project investors are all signing the agreement that they are going ahead with the investment. After the financial close, we will be able to provide the 60% of our support, so 60% of the 60% of the costs. And that payments will be disbursed according to the cash flow projections of the project. So we are trying to enable a flexible arrangement whereby the innovation fund support will be paid against milestones. Project milestones will be defined in the generic terms in our guidance, but project promoters will be able to consider their specific milestones. They have some specific milestones that go beyond those defined in the framework. What we mean by the milestones is rather, again, a view from the investor point of view. Okay, so what are your typical steps? In the stage before the financial close, probably you need front-end engineering study first. So if that is your milestone, we'll be able to pay out some funding at that stage. If during construction you have additional milestones, putting parts of the technology, building, constructing, testing, whatever, those milestones will be defined by you, by the project. They need to be commensurate with your business plan, with your financial planning, with your timing. This will be project specific. Okay, and we allow that. And the payments will be also designed along those lines. So the projects will know the total volume of the support from the Innovation Fund, how those volumes will be put in time. This will be the reflection of the real investment process that the projects will need to follow. Why we have considered this compared to NER 300, where we only in principle paid once the projects enter into operation. There's a huge gap during their preparation and construction. So now we allow to provide financing during that process. The 40% of our funding can be provided in the early stage before financial close, but it's not pre-financing because also that funding is against certain milestones that you will define. Okay, and then the rest as the project continues during construction or operation. So that is in terms of cash flow. When it comes in terms of the final volume of the grant that the project is able to receive, our delegated regulation states that if your project delivers at least 75% of the greenhouse gas emissions avoided that you promised at the moment when you signed your grant award. So if you reach at least 75% of your promise, you are entitled to the 100% of funds. All the funds can be used. If your delivered greenhouse gas emissions avoidance during the operation, so during the monitoring period, where we will check, you will report back on real emissions avoidance achieved. If this is below 75%, the grant may be reduced or recovered proportionally to the shortage of your avoided emissions compared to the promised.
This is to the 100% shortage.
To the 75.
To the 75.
Yes. So our threshold, we are already embedding this flexibility because
if I would get 100 million, let's say.
Yes.
And then at 75 I achieve, I get 100 million. If I achieve 70,
it's a 5% shortage.
That's then 5% shortage, and then I would have this 5 on the 100.
We are trying to, the objective there is that we do not allow too much gaming.
Yeah.
Okay, because it's easy to promise. Yeah. And then it's hard to deliver. So we are trying, and that's why we have this project maturity now methodologies developed, so that this is very transparent and clear from the beginning for every single project promoter. We are already providing 25% buffer, because we know it's difficult to be 100% precise because of the external conditions that may change. And this also calls for prudence at the side of the project promoter, that you embed those considerations in your application. And you rather bet on the conservative side rather than on too optimistic, because this then may harm your own interests. Now, how this is going to be implemented in the contractual terms, this is still obviously work in progress because it is related to the methodologies. We may reserve some funding for the operational part and then recover that or reduce, or we can reduce the funding that was already paid out. But we will see.
Two short questions. Is there any fixed amount between CapEx and OpEx? And the second is, what is if we reach more than 100%?
If you will
get more,
the thing is that we don't have the formula here, but it's in the delegated regulation, and it will be discussed on the workshop. Yes, you will bid when you apply on two key factors. One is your requested funding from the Innovation Fund, which is a function of your calculation of relevant costs based on your CapEx and net present value of OpEx compared to the actual, and the total volume of greenhouse gas emissions that you intend to avoid with the project. Both of those factors are in correlation, and it is your choice, which is the subject and function of your business behind, of the plan, of what the project intends to deliver, whether you ask for more funding or whether you promise a big delivery. So they will influence the cost efficiency selection criteria, which is one of the factors that we will analyze. Okay, so that is a system where we also provide quite a lot of flexibility to projects really to think thoroughly before applying, to play with the possible solution and scenarios, and choose that seems to be most relevant or most promising for the project. Yeah? The 25% buffer, the 75% threshold is really there to allow some rate of error, because we understand that these projects may take a very long time.
I just wanted to ask the question whether you get more, you don't get more.
No, you can't.
But you can get the full amount of the grant factor. Remember, many agreements.
Okay. Yeah.
The renewable energy projects have to deliver over 5-year periods. If they delivered 100% every year, they actually got the grant over 4 years rather than 2 times. They still some incentive.
And because we are related to the financial regulation of the EU, once your grant award is signed, the maximum amount is the maximum. You cannot get more. Because otherwise you will be changing the condition of the sum, which we cannot do retrospectively.
I know it's a little bit early, but if you have a milestone signing of the FEED study, let's say, you sign it, and then you would get some of the 40%, depending on what was agreed. Do you have any idea how long it would take to disburse the money?
Disburse?
On the cash flow side, any idea yet? It's too early to say.
I mean, from our end, we will be as fast as we can because the objective is really, if you imagine that this will be all electronic. Okay, so your application and then how you will follow the project. On the other hand, there will be the project officer at INEA that will be implementing the grants. You both will be working with the same application from two ends. So you will yourself, when applying, encode your deliverables in time. Whenever the deliverable is delivered and confirmed, the payment shall be triggered, and it will not take long.
Usually some months, some.
60 to 90 days is the standard in the horizon.
Okay, so in 1 to 2 months, 3
Well,
months,
yeah.
Even less can be.
it can be even less, so it's quite near to this.
We are trying to avoid the situation exactly where you deliver your milestone, your reporting period ends in December, and you wait 1 year for the money. No, this is not what we are in.
Thank you.
Quick question. Have I misheard, or did you really operate the terms of CapEx and OpEx in terms of emissions? So like how big was the saving of emissions to set up the project, and how big are the savings in emissions during the project?
What we will check is this period. So during your reporting period, once the project is operational, which can be from 3 to 10 years, you will come back with your calculations and verified reports, or this is the amount of emissions that I have avoided through the project. We will compare the sum of those emissions with what you have promised when you applied for funding. And you will reward. If you achieve at least 75% of those, you are able to receive 100% of the grant. If it's below 75%, then we will need probably to reduce or go subject to further considerations, whether there is a force majeure, whether there is an abrupt regulatory change, or a change that you could not influence as a project promoter. So we are not trying to penalize project promoters for things they could not influence, but rather to establish a discipline in the system and at both ends, so that the promoters would not overshoot their expectations just to game the system and receive the money, and then simply not be able to deliver. Okay, so, and again, what is your choice in terms of the business model behind your promises when you come to the award? It's your choice. We are not regulating that.
One last question in the moment from my side. Some CO2 emissions will be related, of course, to the lifetime of the project. Yeah, if it's 10 years, if we talk, for example, batteries, if it works for 10 years or for 20 years, of course, that will have different impacts.
Okay.
And of course, if I invent a system which lasts double the life conventional system, let's say the main reflow will be, let's say, in a time period maybe far beyond that.
What we have in our legal framework is that we can support your project and calculate your emission savings from 3 to 10 years after entering into operation. So that is a standard.
So whatever happens after that, nobody wants. Okay.
Because we need to standardize the system also to be able to compare.
You mentioned earlier that one of the factors that contributed to the lack of success of the NER 300 was
Failure.
the failure of the NER 300 was the issue with policy and regulatory changes along the way. So that was a learning, that was a lesson learned. How are you, or are you at all internalizing these into the process? How will you deal with that?
So, I mean, there is one important consideration today, which is the Green Deal. The climate law. So any solution that is going to materially reduce or avoid the greenhouse gas emissions, we think should rather have supported regulatory framework, whether it is at the EU or member state level. If, in any case, there is another regulatory change that the project promoter could not influence, despite all the effort put to the project, then we may judge this as a force majeure, and in that case, we will not be covered. Okay. So that is also the call judgment of the commission, of the authorizing officer, case by case. If you really implemented your project as planned, but because of the fact that they are outside of the remit of your choices, would influence the delivery, which is materially below what you promised, but you couldn't influence that, then obviously we will not recover the resources. Okay, but this 75% is there really to ensure that the projects are prudent when they apply for funding, that they judge well on one hand side how much money they are asking for and how much they are able to do. Okay, and we are trying to really limit the scope for gaming, and also the prudency is a good thing in investments, as you know. So
Thank you.
So I hope this is clear. One more probably comment. So we have two defined milestones already in the legal basis, which is the financial close and entry into operation. These two milestones will be obligatory for every project. All the rest, we will have a discussion on the milestones later in March, but normally you should have a chance to design your milestones according to your investment plan, which I think does make a lot of sense. Okay. And probably one below the like a footnote, we may need, because of the changes on the market, to recheck the fundamentals of the costing, exactly those two months, the financial close and entry into operation. Okay, so we can go up with the grant. This once it's fixed, it's fixed. But if, for instance, you have a sudden increase in your revenues because, I don't know, electricity prices shoot down or go up, depending on what you collect, then your model will need to be adjusted. Okay. But still, this is a function of the relevant costs, which will move according to your additional costs, which are the function of costs and revenues. So I think it's self. How does the Innovation Fund sit in the overall frame? I think this is also important for you to consider, because we are not the only fund out there. I think with the new Green Deal, with the new MFF, with the Sustainable Investment Plan, I think Europe is really putting a lot of resources on the table for the green, for the investments to decarbonize the system. And the Innovation Fund is probably one of those, but not the only. As we said before, we are not a research. So this is really somewhere in the middle, where you have piloted your solution, your project, you would like to upscale it, you would like to make it commercial, deploy it on the market terms, and you are seeking for risk capital, risk funding. This is what we are providing essentially. Once you upscale your first application and you really want to roll out and multiply the solution across the market, where the market in the meantime catches up, so your business model is understood by the funders, we will have additional resources available. What we are trying to do also in the design of the systems, we are busy discussing with other colleagues in the Commission to allow co-funding of projects. So the project can be co-financed from other centrally managed EU programs. You will receive funding from Innovation Fund, which is up to 60%, but the rest can be provided by another programs that are available, like Connecting Europe Facility or InvestEU, which is a new program that will provide debt or equity financing to projects. It should be easier for you to grant from the Innovation Fund because you have your base risk covered. And if you seek additional capital, this is exactly what we will promote. Or like projects that are difficult or complex because they are like industrial synergy projects, full chain CCS. Parts of the project can be covered by the Innovation Fund. The other part can be covered, for instance, by the Connecting Europe Facility. So if you talk about transport grids, etc., in your case, I don't know, transmission distribution networks, they will be also eligible on the sector. We will try to enable, as time goes by, to simplify the conditions for promoters to enable those combinations. Okay. It is still work in progress because the MFF is still being designed, the new multi-annual financial framework. But with the Green Deal and the push to green in the system, I think we will also try to establish those synergies and be more clear, as we will know the facts when communicating back to you. The project development assistance in that respect is an interesting proposition, because if the project is rejected in the first stage because of low maturity, but still deemed interested and invited for the project development assistance, that support provided on site by the EIB will already look at those considerations. Okay, so they will help you to check your financials, to see where, from, and how you can probably combine your resources and design your financing strategy accordingly. Okay, so that's for those projects that will need additional support. We hope, obviously, there will be many projects that will go straight to the second stage after the first stage evaluation, to be seen. And just one slide, what is the difference with the Horizon Europe? So again, our objective is really to build and operate physical assets or physical solutions, whether they are digital or whether they are steel or concrete. It depends on the project. In Innovation Fund, single entities mostly we would expect would apply, because it is really the business case that is typical to a single applicant, but we will not reject consortia. If you need to create a consortia, it is your choice. For us, the main selection relates along those 5 criteria, and we talk business, we talk investment. So that is, let's say, something that makes us different from Horizon, where we probably talk more about what is the contribution to innovation, to the larger policy objectives. With the disbursement of grants, again, we will have most probably lump sum payments against milestones. So you will design your application, you will calculate how much money you are asking. If you are awarded, that is a lump sum of funding, which will be divided along your path, and those lump sums will be paid if your milestones are met. We will not have a full costing model. We will not ask for an integrity calculations. We may check the financials through external auditors that you will be providing as at those 2 milestones, but not as in Horizon Europe, where you need to send your timesheets with the time spent on particular work package. Okay? And the calls, so we don't have like 7-year work program. We can't, because we don't know how much money we will have. We will monetize allowances 3 times a week throughout the decade. So we will also depend on the carbon pricing at the time of monetization. We will have annual or regular calls, and we will also try to adjust the conditions based on the learnings from the previous call, so that we will also need to reflect back on what went wrong, on what was good. Okay, so we have a bit more flexibility than in the typical EU program, and I think that flexibility is necessary, especially in these kind of investments. Yes, and the last slide related to the timing. If everything goes well and we are still alive, we should launch the first call before summer, we say. Then we will have some time for the first phase. Then there will be evaluation, the second phase, and after the first phase for those projects that will be deemed relevant for project development assistance will be already awarded. So the first award will be for the project development assistance. Then we will have a second phase evaluation next year. And we hope that we will be able to award the grants towards the end of next year or early 2022. This is necessary. It seems very long, but if you take into account the wide range of sectors that we are covering, the robustness of evaluation that we would like to introduce, okay, the framework in which these projects will be implemented, the risks, because we talk real investments and they need to happen. I think it is a relevant timing to allow for thorough assessment and negotiation of your contracts, because you will also be faced to risks, as we will. So you will need to find some time to come to an agreement that will be agreeable for both parties. So that's why we have a longer time, but I think it's still in line with other programs. So you should calculate also with this time that will be needed until the awards are signed. Okay. So, and please spread the word about us. We are also trying to be better in communication. We are trying to be transparent, so all the information is always put on our website. We're trying to update this regularly, so immediately after the workshops or activities, those appear on the website. And just a reminder for today, so those projects that we'll present in this workshop, if you agree, we would publish your presentation shortly on the website of the Innovation Fund, so that they are also visible to the extent. If you have, let's say, IPR considerations on the website, okay. So please follow the website. We are trying to update this as we go ahead.
May we go back to the slide about the ecosystem? How do you see EIB here? It seems like you're sort of competing with the EIB with the expansion debt, for example. Even the size of the project are very similar.
The EIB will definitely be here. The InvestEU is the 38 billion EU budget parked as a guarantee for investments that will be allowed by that guarantee. InvestEU will create products, as we call them, so like the Innofin EDP today or CEF debt facility. They are merged under the single roof. And the InvestEU will enable to finance projects that are economically viable, obviously, through additional debt or equity financing. EIB will have a key role there as one of the main implementing partners. They have 75% of that guarantee at their end. As a Green Bank of Europe, and with their changed lending policy recently, I think there will be more aggressive approach from the bank to reach out to promoters to have a bigger pipelines in the decarbonization of projects. We will work very closely with them, not only because they will provide our project development assistance, if confirmed, but also because of the fact that they will have an important role here. And as we learned in the Innofin EDP case, where we co-finance the projects from any of 300 with unspent funds through Innofin EDP financing, so we take the Greenfield project, for instance, the project received any N300 grant at the early stage when it was selected. It took several years until the project promoters and investors signed a financial closing agreement. And at that moment, the Innofin EDP signed additional loan, which is backed up by the NER300 unspent funds. So the project is benefiting twice. First from that, second from the loan that is enabled through the guarantee that is backed up by unspent money. We are considering similar construction, probably with Innovation Fund resources. So that we will set aside some part of the budget for the InvestEU to top up the guarantee and enable the projects that receive the grants in the first place when they reach financial goals, and will be looking for additional capital to have access to additional financing. Okay, so this is very close cooperation with the EIB.
This is very complicated.
It's not complicated.
It's just looking from us as simple guys who just do stuff on the ground. I'm actually talking to EIB this week, and the kind of project and kind of financing, kind of criteria, kind of sizes, everything that is discussed with them is very similar to what I hear now about the Innovation Fund. It's just you provide a grant and they provide the loan. So apparently you're competing and frankly you're winning. Are you really competing, or are they slightly different criteria? I'm talking about the venture debt.
Yeah, I mean the background framework and fundamentals of the projects will be in essence the same.
Mm-hmm.
Because if your project will not be able to make it economically, you will not be able to reduce it. And in that case, it doesn't make sense to provide any grant. Okay, so the base fundament behind the investment, being that it is economically viable, challenging but viable, is the same. We have a common denominator.
Mm-hmm.
When it comes to time factor, we will give 4 years for your financial close. Okay, you will have to demonstrate already in the application that you focus, okay, without the financial side. But there is a time given to project promoters to revise, reframe, redesign your financing structure when you are signing the financial agreement. And there the EIB and other funders comes in with additional capital provided to the project. Okay, so we are providing, let's say, the first injection of the risk funding that will reduce your own equity requirements, which is difficult to receive. The additional funding will come from the market or other funding sources, like new programs for and projects will have up to 4 years' time to conclude those deliverables.
Thanks.
Yeah, so everything or- Okay.
Great. Thank you, Roman. Thank you, Maria. Thank you for the presentation. I don't know if there are some more questions and answers. Now would be the moment. Did you see if there was something on the chats or which came up?
Maybe very practical. So if we have a project now that ongoing, what would be the next steps to do? So like tomorrow.
If you have a project ongoing,
No, like we are like making the development. So that could help in the financial.
the next step is that you should probably be ready to submit, and we will. I hope after these workshops that we have today and tomorrow, when we will come back with let's say refined methodological framework.
Yeah, that would be.
What I would recommend is to check that framework on your project.
Yeah.
And
So that's
see,
why I
okay,
have
so
to draft.
these are my financials, this is how it works, because the colleagues are developing the, let's say, the financing model, which you can already populate with your project data.
Is this, you have a website or? where
I don't
can we-
think it's on the website, but we can make this available. And I think we will after the workshops, so that you see how this works for you. And then this will also enable you to prepare impact for the application.
If you can send it to me.
Basically, what you should do is that your project is compatible, and therefore you should talk to your member states where you want to deploy it, to have their support. You should fit to look at the maturity of the project and tick all the boxes which are in there. Maybe you have a pre-feasibility study done already or something else. You have to show how mature your project is, and you need to collect all this now, prepare all this, put it together in order to then following the criteria, selection criteria presented in the right way. But you need some support also from outside, which you're not can control on your own, like member states like ours. So I would look into this now already. You have still some months to prepare all the studies and all the assumptions if it's good or not, and then present it the right way.
Yes, there is.
Sorry.
You-
So from the framework and the timeline, it looks like it's to go and look for projects at universities that are kind of, till the end of the research phase, right? Because it's just, in the end, it's half a year to write the
For the
proposal.
first call, we will
Yeah.
have regular calls, so you can still go and look for those
Okay.
projects and prepare them for one of the next calls.
Mhm. Okay.
Yeah, but for the first call,
But then better than the small ones, or?
you can look at, yes, but indeed, small ones also have to be mature. Yeah, small ones doesn't mean not mature.
Yeah. And again, so the first deadline is for everything, the big ones and the small ones?
No,
Or
just the big ones.
that's the big ones, okay. And the next year would be, okay.
Regarding some of the, let's say, there's two calls. So there's one on the large infrastructure now, and there's another one on the smaller ones. In your presentation for the whole program, you basically sent out the entire program around large industrial infrastructure. Is that just because you have the first call now? Is then that's going to change later on when we have the second smaller project coming up?
We are now really focused on the first call. Okay, so this is why we are all the time saying we have a two-stage, and these processes are there. For the second call,
That's a different thing.
we'll come with another outreach.
And I have a second question. In the current European legislation, there was a push towards putting consumers at the center of the energy system. Citizen concept. Is that something that you're going to take into consideration, even though we're talking about large infrastructure, that could be potentially a additional criteria? Are you going to look at this governance model in terms of choosing projects, in terms of rewarding it as an innovative criteria? Or would you like to focus on, or will you focus only on technology related topics?
Well, we need to see, I mean, we do want to look at EU objectives. So it depends how clear these objectives are, so we can take them into consideration when actually evaluating the project. Climate neutrality is fairly clear. We know that the power grid has to be 100%, for example, climate neutral. But putting citizens in the center, how can we actually, of course, that is an objective, but can we actually judge the project against this objective or not? We're still developing this, in fact, under the selection criteria of degree of innovation and scalability. So this, in fact, these workshops today and the previous ones were to seek input from you as well. What is important in each sectors? And this is like an important observation that for energy storage projects, and we know that a lot of projects are developed in cities and communities, and we actually want to reach to those projects as well, so long as that, of course, they reduce emissions and they have potential for scalability in the future.
I mean, it was linked that involving citizens from the get-go actually reduces their consumption.
Yeah, but you will need to justify this.
Sure.
So again, we are not, the policy objective is indeed that your project will have to demonstrate the avoidance of greenhouse gas emissions. If your business model can build on the fact that you will have distributed basis in which consumers will become active players on the market, and you will be able to manage their behavior in the way you expect their behavior. This will be all additional points in selection. But we can't look to the project and say, okay, so is this kind of consumer-centric or not? It has to be embedded in your proposition, in the business model behind it. If it's the intrinsic part of your investment, if it is based on the fact that you have a distributed system, which may be intelligent, which may be smart, you will guarantee through your application or whatever it is, that the consumers, by their behavior and their consumer choices, will deliver the main objective of the investment.
So you don't consider that as an innovative aspect?
Well, it depends on what it is.
Okay, it depends on.
Yeah, one question already covers maybe the next 2 days. Also more not for the first call, but for the following calls. How dynamic will be the objectives? So can we learn?
Well, we will learn.
That's why you make the workshop and also each workshop today. And with this, we will maybe move on. We have some Q&A afterwards and some chances, but we have some presentation we wanted to share with you. And I will kick it off with a short presentation on why we believe that storage and the storage part in this innovation fund is so important. And was said in the past already, I will go quite fast, finding the over 2 or 3 industry representatives who will show what they need and see. First of all, why do we need storage? This innovation part in this question, this is what we're talking about, not the research part in the question. We clarified this before. I mean, you're aware maybe that we will have a system in 2050. It's an example of Spain in the decarbonized world. We will see mainly that solar will be one of the big drivers, wind will be one of the big drivers, and others will come, which we see now emerging. And we need to shift, therefore, energy. In this case, it's a Spanish grid in 2050. It was Endesa who did it, one of the members we have in East. And they say that they need to shift 345 gigawatt hours over the day. This is more than the production of whole Belgium, which is 250 gigawatt hours a day. So we have to shift more than this country, right and left, over one day, not only to produce it at the right time, but to shift it around. And this is quite huge for a daily balancing. And you cannot do this only with batteries because we just don't have enough capacity to do this. And the cost would also explode. But that's another question. The cost, if you keep the costs away, it's just not feasible and not foreseeable that we have. And this is the second part why we believe it's not possible with batteries, it's the seasonal storage. And then we come to discussion about higher volumes of energy stored, about heat as a storage medium and others, where you need to shift 25,000 gigawatt hours over the seasons in order to balance a decarbonized system where we want to go. That's the aim in 2050. So this is the impact we plan. And we need to prepare in the next years that we can shift over the day and over the seasons. So it's really something which is quite important. And therefore we see that there are different means. Obviously, you see that there's flexible generation and then distribution systems also. We have the transmission systems, so a bigger system where the renewables can spread. But we have also all the storage part, which is for us one of the main drivers, which is supporting a lot of the demand side management of the consumers. It's a lot of home batteries and home storage and heat and so on, but also the sector coupling and the sector interfaces, which are important to make sure we have this heating, decarbonized transport, and hydrogen as a carrier for industry, but also for storage medium, which could be rectified. So that's really where we see the role in the power system flexibility, bringing up in different parts. If you go to the technologies, and I will not go into the details, but I want to insist, it's not only batteries, it's not only lithium-ion, it's a myriad of technologies, and that's important to acknowledge. We have put them in 5 families: chemical, electrochemical, electrical, mechanical, and thermal storage, which is basically, we believe the families stay, but the members of the family will change. We will have new batteries, we will have new ways of getting there, but we have the same groups. And we need this, as I said, different technologies for different energy storages, in a different longer storage, energy volumes, and so on and so on. So we need a mix of different technologies and different applications which will come together. So this is one of the important messages we wanted to share with you. So it's not only one technology and not only one application. And we then asked our members to come forward with some examples what they see would fit in the innovative part, where you should use it. And we had 2 parts. And that's the discussion which came the last time up in the Innovation Fund. We have one, how can we take everybody with us? And then looking at this just transition funding also and so on, and maybe build upon this to help existing companies to move along, to decarbonize. And then the question about CCS and CCU is one with those. Should you apply to those? Should you apply it only to industries and so on? Then we have the question about if you make these devices more efficient, less CO2 emitting, how to value this. But there's for sure a need for this. And then there's a completely not linked to the existing system, new ideas to get more flexibility, to get more renewables in and so on. So not linked to centralized power plants or whatever, which is then a new approach. And this is some examples. So this is examples from the members, from the EASE members. It doesn't mean specifically that EASE has the support for one or the other idea. It was just given, and we share this with you. What we said is one of the first drivers is these energy islands. Either it's a physical island or a geographical island, but we see that the energy systems in the islands are the precursor for the European energy system, which is coming now. So if you find solutions for the islands and how to balance and decarbonize the system, we can learn a lot and use a lot on the continents later on. So that's one of the ideas that are optimizing the islands and reduce the use of mostly its engines, diesel engines, and reduce the use of these engines by renewables and storage, and demonstrated the flexibility of system, including consumers on these islands, making maybe energy communities and so on being there. So this is one of the first way of demonstrating such technologies in an ecosystem, which will be then used on the larger part. We have another one through optimizing existing plants and reducing the use of the fossil fuels. So it's not replacing, but it's reducing a lot and making other solutions through energy storage, through renewables available on these islands. So that's another example we have been given from our members. We saw it that we have energy intensive areas, and now it's the part, should it be in energy intensive areas? We believe it should. We have the energy efficiency of on the land existing generation fleets. It will allow to integrate thermal storage in existing plants. and using them to take energy out of the system and so on. So there are specific ideas on how we can use existing assets and take them with us to decarbonize. This is interesting for all the generation capacities who have fossil based. So Germany want to go out in 38, which is still in 18 years, but want to leave in 18 years. And other countries see it might more longer, but they still need to take them and help them to get them. We talk about the longer term seasonal storage. So there we talk about, we didn't have examples, but we got a lot of requests for electrolyzers, applied electrolyzers, making chemicals, making fuels, about seasonal storage. We have this compressed air, heat storage, and so on. So a lot of different technologies I mentioned before in these families, which should be applied to. And there are different examples coming there, but I will not go through those now. But what is important for us, just an example for the thermal one, and this ancillary service digitalization, flexible electricity interconnection, it's all not specifically and only linked to energy storage, but here a lot of synergies with other sectors about the grid operation, how to operate the grid, how to use more digitalization, ancillary services. Storage is a main part of to allow new actors to participate. And this is also then looking at the Clean Energy Package implementation and how to do this. And then we believe there's a lot of innovative activities to be done in the implementation of the Clean Energy Package. But one thing is clear for us, it's really difficult when we evaluate the CO2 avoided per euro, then it's not only the environmental footprint as such, but it's the whole benefit to the system which needs to be put in place. And that's something which is very tricky for storage because I showed you the different technologies, I showed you the different applications. That's exactly where we are. And we're very happy maybe in the next days or weeks to come back to this, to make something more dedicated, more to the point exchange of practicalities on how such a thing could be taken up and looked at. So basically, for a conclusion very fast is that obviously, it's an enabler for the decarbonization energy storage, and you will not be able to decarbonize without energy storage. These are the aims which we want to achieve. We have it, the projects are very versatile. We will see 3 different projects in a moment. But if you talk about specific product, if it's a fuel or you produce a battery in a more innovative way and therefore reduce the battery's footprint in the production, or you have a new chemistry or something like this, that's one way when you compare a classic battery with another battery, maybe that's fine. But if you then want to go to the avoided CO2 emissions in the overall system, this is then more complicated. And that's exactly the point which I think we should keep in mind. And to illustrate a bit the different technologies and the possibilities now, I will invite 3 EASE members. We have first a battery by Andre, if you want to come forward. And he will present a bit what his company is looking at, so give some details. Please, the floor is yours. Thanks. You could introduce yourself.
It's about 10, 12 minutes, right?
Yeah, 10 minutes. But the time is important.
We Geyser Battery is quite young Finnish startup. We were set up only in 2018, but this project, this company has about 30 years of work exactly in this field proceeding. Geyser Battery was set up to bring to the production sort of the new invention of our group that had been working with various battery chemistries and supercapacitors since late 80s. Basically, Geyser Batteries is a new class of batteries. It is using the energy storage method, or rather combining energy storage methods that have not been combined before. And for the purpose of this discussion, the most distinctive thing is that the electrolytes that we use are aqueous. So water is used as a solvent, which is a game-changing factor in terms of the safety, in terms of the carbon footprint of these batteries, and surely in terms of the cost. Reasons for doing that is that there are major issues with existing safety and sustainability of the existing batteries, and there is a real undeserved need in the high power sector in the energy storage. So, as I said before, geyser batteries, we have been producing supercapacitors for something like 15, 20 years. And this is just some of the customers that we had been serving. The first one on the left, it had financed our production line. We delivered hundreds of thousands of devices for them. That's Car Audio company, actually. But over time, we shifted more into the transportation sector, doing things primarily that are typical for supercapacitors, like cold cranking systems, even hybrid electric hybrid railway locomotives. So different sizes of systems. And in terms of in terms of the context, quick discussion about about batteries versus supercapacitors. So supercapacitor is the way of storage energy through electrostatic separation of charge. So this is something that can be done like millions of times without significant degradation of the system at very high power, because the chemical reaction is not involved, but the amount of energy is limited to the surface, so it's pretty small. With batteries, you know, it's basically the opposite. So because of the chemical reaction, you can store a lot, but the nature of the chemical reaction limits the power and the number of cycles. We are competing in the high power segment. So in the high power segment, the way to use lithium-ion batteries is to oversize them. Oversizing them essentially limits the specific energy. How small specific energy or how smaller specific energy gets depends on the requirements on the number of charge-discharge cycles or specific power that you want to get from the battery. But what we have achieved is we have managed to add a chemical reaction to supercapacitor. So in our systems, we have a redox reaction near the surface of very same electrodes that we had been using for supercapacitors. So this allows us to have specific energies well in excess of 10 watt-hours per kilo at the module level, while keeping the number of charge-discharge cycles same as for supercapacitors that we had been producing, and having very high specific power, because essentially it is a supercapacitor just with a chemical reaction happening on the surface. Cost-wise, we are competitive as well. Basically, it is still an aqueous system, so we do not need dry rooms or heavily controlled environments to produce. It is an assembly process in the room similar to this one. Materials used are not rare or expensive, so we have activated carbon for electrodes. It's not some fancy engineered single wall nanotubes or graphene or anything like that. And getting into so we are better and cheaper than supercapacitors, and to be able to compete successfully against lithium-ion, it's a matter of scale, essentially. So we need to get to any comparable scale to the lithium-ion production. However, even now, with the pilot production line that we're now setting up in Vaasa in Finland, the cost basis for our systems in high power segment, where lithium-ion batteries are oversized, for example, 10 times, examples being autonomous electric construction equipment, we are already at the similar cost level. The technology bonus, as I said, is of course the aqueous electrolytes. So unlike traditional supercapacitors based on organic electrolytes, unlike lithium-ion, sorry for the fonts, some messed up in here. We are not requiring this energy-intensive manufacturing process. So, and naturally, because of the water being the solvent, these batteries cannot burn. So basically, it's something that is safe both for the system and for the people that use it and for the plant. Another advantage technologically is the bipolar design that we use. So we're not producing individual cells. We're stacking electrodes, separators, current collectors in kind of sandwiches, to put in simple words, creating these blocks of cells and then packing them into the module. So our final product is always a high voltage ready-to-use module. And this is the design that we have been using for a couple of dozen years with SuperCap. So it's well proven, and we're probably one of the few who really have mastered it at scale. apart from the functional characteristics that this brings, it's also resulting in easy recycling. So basically, dismantling of this module is stripping off layer by layer, which is very well known from the beginning, of known materials. So as long as the passport of the device is with you, you can just dismantle it in a very precise fashion. So essentially, this is a really sustainable solution for the energy storage. First, we create the device with minimum CO2 without using any contact materials. It lasts 10 to 100 times longer than, for example, a lithium-ion battery, and then you recycle it very simply, while not creating any hazard during its use. Now we're setting up, as I said, the production line. We have some of these devices have been operational for already 2 years with some of our previous supercapacitor clients have switched to this new electrochemistry, and we are starting proof of concepts with tier ones and OEMs in all the target sectors. Actually, in grid, we also agreed on the trial starting from the next year when we'll have production line running to be able to deliver the volume. So we are targeting transportation, industrial, marine sectors now primarily with hybrid systems. However, we can go as far as, for example, electric ferries, where the whole point is to be able to charge your battery very fast and very safe, and use that energy over the time frame of a couple of hours, or preferably less in our case, because we don't have that high energy as lithium-ion. So in terms of the grand scheme of applications, this is for transportation sector, not a traction battery, but like a power buffer in the system, or if it's a traction battery, to sort of use energy of it to bring your vehicle as far as possible. This is a traction battery for a short route, but for fast recharge and long usage time frame. In the grid sector, we're starting with applications like stabilization of the grid, frequency regulation. However, time shifting is an application that we are eyeing in the 5-7 years perspective when we'll get the costs right. And this is a matter of scale. The market launch strategy, now the priority task for us is really to make sure that the production line that we're setting up will be loaded with the orders from day one. So we are kind of looking at the projects with the shortest possible time frame and time to market, while also working on the longer projects, particularly in the segments, the emerging segments like 48-volt systems in transportation sector. And of course, we are looking at lucrative opportunities with OEMs where they're approaching us for developing high-power hybrid systems, for example. So standardization is our key, and we're trying to avoid one-offs because we really need to prioritize projects at the moment. This is a slide about the production line. I don't think we need to get into this. Key is that it is a relatively simple process, and this is the production line that we've been running for supercapacitors. As you see, it's just an assembly line. So it is fundamentally an inexpensive product. So this is in short about us. So I think the reason we are here and desperately trying to present is because we're completely in line with what you are guys doing.
What would be so in the theoretical option that you would apply, what would be the project?
Yeah, so by the way, thanks very much for the presentation. It was really putting pieces together. I think given the time frame, given the scales, etc., the project that we would apply, I'm thinking now about two alternatives. One alternative would be to apply for the setup of the second production line, which you already see how it will look like. So while we're designing and sort of doing this first production line, we already see the way to scale up the process without disproportionately increasing capex. So like, for example, now we're stacking these things, and next process will be laminating materials and then cutting these cells out of them. So it will be much more efficient. And so emission reduction is clearly coming from the fact that this battery is so much more carbon neutral compared to alternatives, both because of the manufacturing process and the lifetime. And to be able to load that production line with orders, the natural sort of step would be to go to the grid sector. And in the grid sector, it's about the cost. So depending on how, for example, we are working closely with Fortum, and depending on the that's the major utility. And so based on their requirement on costs, there probably a subsidy being needed in the first years of operation before we will be able to reduce costs ourselves through the better position with the suppliers, through the learning curve. So that's one thing that's kind of more direct. Alternatively, if we need to be very aggressive on the emission reduction, that would be a project where we apply together with, for example, Danfoss, who do electric systems for ferries. And we do a project of ferries electrification, whereby and that's why it was my question to you, whereby we produce emission savings on the capex side. So while establishing the ferry, without creating huge carbon footprint of the ferry itself, and then operating it over the lifetime, because the carbon emission reduction is huge in the ferry sector. So that will become a project that encompasses both capex and OpEx component in terms of emission reduction. That's just what comes straight from
I think that one of the considerations that we are looking into in the storage sector is that we will need to go beyond the pure capex and the greenhouse gas emissions related to the line where you manufacture the components, because the real emission avoidance comes with use. So one of the considerations that we are having is, okay, how would project like yours, because your business is to produce batteries, how could you secure a certain way of modus operandi through a contract with your customers who would use the ferry? In other words, if you calculate the greenhouse gas emissions impact of the project in the longer perspective, how far can you go in agreeing with, I don't know, the port of Helsinki, who may buy the ferry from you, that they will operate the ferry in a certain regime, because it again will depend on what power the ferry will charge to the battery. So I think these are the considerations in energy storage, in particular sector, related to manufacturing. I think we will invite the producers also, but the vision, I think, will need to go beyond the production line, because the emissions avoidance will essentially come through the use of the product.
I think we were constantly chatting with my friend and colleague who is actually now on the Skype call. It would be really helpful if we could sit with some of your colleagues and really kind of discuss alternatives and how it looks like and how things are calculated. Because
this is very welcome. In fact, throughout the whole process, we have been calling projects actually to come up with example calculations. How do you see your emission reductions, and to check against our methodology? Because in fact, for the two cases, it will be different, the calculation, or the reference will be different in any case. The calculation will be the same, but the reference will be different and resulting in a different greenhouse gas emission avoidance. So if you have tried to do that already yourself, this will be really helpful for us, because these are more difficult cases than some of our cases are really straightforward, like reduction of renewable energy.
Yes. But that's again what I tried to mention before. If we try to judge something like this on a, let's say, 3 to 10 year time frame, and we have products, and I see that in particular in the storage field, which last much longer. And of course, the main impact on the CO2 reduction will be also in correlation with lifetime. For example, we also discuss actually with standardization having automotive batteries in a different use later on as storage batteries, which seems to be easy, but it's quite complicated. So, of course, and this directly has the impact, of course, what will be, let's say, the initial CO2 footprint of producing the system, which will reduce the CO2 emission. In combination, of course, how long it will be, and how quick it will be worn off.
For this clear, we have not a 10-year, which I mentioned, and we have to keep this in mind.
Because you just imagine we would say, okay, your lifetime is 50 years. Would you report 50 years after the project back to us? I mean,
it's a question whether we will be able, and that was also here. I mean, that was with the long fact that it's a question how we judge the possibility. Of course, that the project has to run more than 10 years or so, clear, due to a lot of reasons. But how we judge finally when we choose, how we judge innovation, etc., by, let's say, by values which, or let's say extrapolation, and partially will be difficult to extrapolate.
Understood.
Yeah.
Understood. I will move on from the time sakes. Thank you very much, Andre, for your presentation. We will have Fernando now, who will present us a different technology, not battery technology.
Yes. Okay. So thank you very much. My name is Fernando Morales. I'm the lead analyst at Highview Power. I'm here to talk about the role of primary energy storage in the EU's near-term future. So I'd like to start the presentation by just addressing the challenges that we'd like to touch with the project we'd like to propose for these calls. And then once we identify those challenges, I'd like to then go into the technology overview to see how we can address those challenges. It will be a high-level overview, so then I will go into the key technology characteristics, and finally I will give a high-level overview of the kind of projects we'd like to propose, or what are the characteristics. So these are the challenges. Obviously, there are too many more. I just have time to cover just a few. But I think the most important thing is to focus on these, the labels to the left, which sort of condense the key ideas. So the first challenge is about stability. So as we know, we now have to deal with different forms of generation in the grid. It used to be developed, or it used to be used by thermal generation, large plant with geosynchronous machines. Now we're moving to inverter-based generation, and this is causing problems in terms of inertia, voltage control, and another thing that is called fast current in feed that is used to detect problems in the grid. So because all of the conventional thermal plants are retiring, it is challenging to source these essential to the grid. And what some grid operators in Ireland are doing now is basically operating plant at the minimum technical level, which means operating them at the lowest efficiency, high emissions. And it is just to procure services that are actually not energy, it's something completely different. This causes two problems. One is obviously operating plant at low efficiency levels, and then the other one is that the balance between demand and supply has to be always maintained. And that means that if you have some thermal plant covering some of that demand, you're preventing some renewable to, in occasions, serve that demand. So there's two effects here. The next one is about curtailment. We have now that renewables are deployed across the grid at distribution level, transmission level. Sometimes these are deployed in places where the infrastructure is not enough to transport that to centers of demand, and there's a lot of curtailment. So obviously, it is expensive to operate the system like that, because most of the time these systems, operators, the wind operators or PV operators, are compensated for that loss of revenue. And obviously, it's energy that is wasted. Nobody is storing that to basically offset CO2 emitting energy. For Blackstad, there's also an impact in terms of the operation of thermal plant and ensuring that in case of a blackout, there's a plant ready to come up and take over or reinstall the power in the system. So what happens is that in sometimes, even if a conventional plant are not needed to operate, they are kept warm to avoid having to wait for many hours before the system can be reinstalled. In this, storage can also provide a solution to this. And finally, carbon capture and utilization. We need to find new ways to come with solutions for this and to make sure how much we're actually capturing. So this is an overview of liquid air energy storage or cryogenic energy storage. It is a process by which we liquefy air, we store it, and we then turn it into electricity. So the process starts by air into the process. This is cleaned. Water and CO2 have to be removed. There's an option to capture the CO2, which at the moment is not implemented in any of the plants we have deployed. Then through compression and refrigeration, this air is turned into air, which is then kept in insulated tanks. And when electricity is needed, this liquid air is pumped, evaporated, and expanded, and this drives a generator, which is a synchronous generator, which is quite relevant. I will tell you why. So some of the key characteristics of the technology is that by using a synchronous generator, we can provide synchronous inertia. This is well, something we can explore later if somebody is interested, the difference between synchronous and synthetic. We also have the capability of providing dynamic voltage support, fast pole current in feed, and this is something also very important, synchronizing and balancing torque, because this can also prevent a lot of issues in terms of the operability of the grid. And then finally, because energy is actually stored in the form of liquid air in insulated tanks, the cost of deploying long duration system is cost effective, let's say. And finally, something that we have not implemented in any of the plants, but it's also relevant. We're thinking of this because of the call is about carbon capture and utilization as well, is including the capability to remove the CO2 and do something with it.
What's the efficiency of the system?
It depends on the amount of heat available, but it's around 50 to 60%. So the characteristics of the project is the location will be EU islands. I think we all agree that those are the places with the greatest need. The scale will be between 5 or hundreds of megawatts with multiple hours of duration. This will depend obviously on the island. And the main applications will be energy time shift, energy security of supply. If there's a chance to actually go for some black start schemes, that would be very good for us. And then ensuring system operability through the services, through the inertia, etc. And finally, capturing CO2. These are just some pictures of the plants we've deployed so far. This is the pilot plant. This was very small. It was outside London. Yeah, I think we would like to go now for 5 to hundreds of megawatts. This is a 5 megawatt plant just outside Manchester. That's all. Thank you.
Thank you very much for 10 minutes. So this was more to show how it is supporting the whole system with the rotating masses and inertia and black start. That is something common for a lot of storage. So this was very interesting. Are there specific questions on this? So there was a question from, and I need to put my glasses on because I'm still not used to the fact that I'm getting older. One day I'll be there. So there's a question on the internet. Dear all, would the project of batteries recycling, which would be highly innovative, be eligible since its purpose is indirectly to reduce CO2 emissions in a circular economy approach? So is battery recycling as such something which could be considered? Then the question would be, where would this fit? I don't know if this is for the consultant or for whom or to. The question is the boundaries of the innovation fund and what will be the next step. Will it battery recycling or car recycling or Where's the
It
limit?
has to be linked to the ETS and what is produced in the ETS. So if in the batteries there are some materials which are actually produced in the ETS, it can be eligible. But otherwise, most probably not, because it will be recovering materials which would otherwise be produced in a carbon-intensive way in the ETS. But it has to be linked to the ETS in one way or another. If it is not energy storage, of course, energy storage is another matter.
That's great. So since I studied law, I like this reply. It depends. Good, but it was clear. If it's linked, then it can. Otherwise, it would be outside.
Exactly.
Good. With this, we come to the third presentation from Iberdrola. And Dan, if you would please take the floor.
Thank you, Hello. So I'm Dan Bolle from the company Iberdrola. We're a global electricity producer based mainly in Spain. No? So thank you also to EASE to give us the opportunity to present today. So I'd like to present to you a pumping storage project, Valdecañas Torrejón. We have a large history in hydro operation in Spain, and this is a novel approach to a proven concept of pump storage. Just to give you an idea here on the physical side, so it's a retrofitting project. We have existing reservoirs to which you want to enable pump storage. So you can see here, don't look too much to the details, but it's mainly to give you a view on the physical reservoirs. No? So on the upper side we have Valdecañas, then there's a small one in between, the Torrejón, and the biggest one downstream, Alcántara. We currently use that one for mainly for seasonal storage, so gather all the water during rain season and then turbining throughout the year. So we've been thinking a long time already. We're really wanting to enable here pumping since the beginning of these reservoirs. Already in the conception of this project, there were a lot of ideas, but then practical problems. And the main problem is actually the very big variations we have over the year in the pumping head between Alcántara and Torrejón, which varies from 20 to 50 meters, which with the traditional pumping is hard. And this problem could be solved by frequency-based variable speed pumping. And so that's then what we would like to do here on the technical side of this innovation. So as I said, the pumping between the lower reservoir from Alcántara to Torrejón would be a frequency converter to do variable speed in this pumping, together with for purpose designed turbine. And then on the next step, so to go from Torrejón to Valdecañas, we don't have this technique as we have a higher power needs. So that would be a controllable turbine. The idea here would be to use a turbine which could be controlled, and then but this is a rather slow process, and then use around 15 megawatts of a battery system combined to do quick regulation with the battery, and then a slower one stepwise with the turbine. So why is this? This is from the technical side, but then from an operation side of view, why is this so interesting to have variable speed? We have we operate a lot of renewable energy and hydro assets. Imagine a day with high wind production and low demand moments, where we are pumping with all our pumping assets. We're producing with wind energy, but we have to sacrifice today water and turbining mode to actually regulate these short-term variabilities of the renewable energy. To give services to the system. So if we have variable speed pumps, we could actually do that in pumping mode. So today our pumps are only on or off. If we could enable this variable speed, we could actually deliver these system requirements to the system in pumping mode. And so we don't have to sacrifice water in turbining, which would in other moments probably displace thermal production capacity. No? So on the cost benefit analysis, so the two pumps together would make for a system of 320 megawatts. Here the big advantage is really in the retrofitting. We're using existing reservoirs and fitting in a pump mode on what's in there. So we estimate the total capex around 90 to 140 million euros. Whereas if we have to start from scratch and have to also build the civil construction of the reservoirs, that would make for a project around 350 million euros. So that's a third of the cost. And there's really the biggest potential of this concept. So we're a mature project. We've already done the feasibility analysis. We're currently doing the technical specifications, but we estimate to be ready to make an investment decision still this year. So we've already done a lot of work on this. So scalability and possible avoidance of CO2 emissions. We have done a very simplified calculation here, just as an illustration. So we estimate to be able to absorb nearly around 1 terawatt hour of energy, which in generation mode, applying the efficiency would then be around 750 gigawatt hours of energy. If that energy would displace the production of a traditional CCGT, then we come around a potential CO2 avoidance of 300,000 tons of CO2 a year just for this project. But as I said, this idea of retrofitting pump storage to existing reservoirs just for our company, Vidrala, is very important, and we have already the idea to, if this works, to apply this to other of our assets. And to make like a quick estimation, if we look to the installed hydro capacity in Europe, if we'll be able to just apply this concept to 5% of what's installed today, that would make for an additional storage capacity of over 5,000 megawatts. So I don't know if you guys have questions. Yes.
What's the main challenge when you do the retrofitting? Because I assume it's not so easy to just put pump storage in an existing traditional plant. So what's the main challenge you saw on this one, and related to scalability also? Can you do it everywhere?
So this one, as a first project, has the advantage that initially when we conceived these three reservoirs, there was already this idea of pumping, but because of these practical issues with the variable pumping hat and other problems we had in the past, this was never put in operation. And this can now be solved with these frequency-driven variable speed pumps. No? And this frequency converter actually, in the past, the economics were way off. We were out of reach, to say so. No? And now with the massive introduction of renewable energy, which also uses this power electronics, costs have come down. We're not yet on the point where we could do it completely market-based, but that's where we hope the Innovation Fund could help us.
So more questions? Seems to be clear then. Thank you very much. It was quite three different technologies, three different ways where energy storage can support the system. With this, we are at the end of the presentation cycle. We wanted to foresee some time if the need is, so there's no obligation to ask questions, but if the need is for clarification, any kind of clarification, this would be the moment to come forward. I mean, we heard before already the question, would something which can last for 20 years, 30 years, 80 years, how is this considered compared to another project which would last for 10 years only? would you give some kudos, some bonus points, some other credits in the evaluation? If you have two battery projects which both save something, but one is the technology we can use for 20 years, would there be a kind of bonus compared to the other or something? That's a question we need to be looked at, if there's a possibility, if you have equivalent projects, to look at some other 20 units. And so the same between hydropower, if it's for 80 years, as you mentioned, then how is it calculated and so on? So it's clear that 10 years is set, but maybe the selection process it adds some points. Who knows?
I think we have some soft arguments which are innovation. Innovation, I think, is hard to put into figures. And so I think at least 7 points could be something which could be considered in the innovation.
Good. Are there more questions for clarification? There are no stupid questions, so it's really the moment. We're a small group, it's the moment to ask them. If you have something which is not clear, you have the commission here, you have the consultants here, you have collective intelligence who can help you reply to all your questions. Anyone? Please. Can you speak up a bit?
Yeah,
Because
the greenhouse gas emission avoidance. Because I understand there's now a workshop taking place to sort of figure out the calculation. But can you maybe tell us a bit more about that? What are the expectations, and will this change every year? Or just a bit more information for it.
Well, ideally, we would like to find optimal methodology that then wouldn't need to change. But I think in reality, we will probably need to adapt or tweak as we will go on. And in essence, I think the objective there is to look for energy storage projects when it comes to greenhouse gas emissions avoidance from, let's say, the wider perspective. So what is it that you charge? When do you charge? Where do you charge and how long? Against what is it when you discharge? Okay, and what is it that you replace when discharging? And to try to balance out those factors in an equation in which you will get the delta. And that delta is the emissions avoidance. Now, there are many factors involved, obviously. Which emissions factor do you use for how long? So this is the subject of further discussion. And yeah, I would just recommend to have a look at this at the concept papers that we published, because they already outline, let's say, 3 key possible methods. One very detailed, one minimum, very simple. And along those, we would need to have discussions and try to find, okay, what is the frame that we can reasonably fix? But on one hand side, from the data point of view, those data could be provided by the promoter with a certain clarity. And on the other, from the evaluation point of view, the method should be able to the evaluators to make judgment. Okay, so these are the challenges. I think from the physical point of view, from the point of view of the engineering of this method, it's not a rocket science, because in every energy storage, it's just the equation of the two. But the question is, how do we fix the boundaries? How do we fix the time? So to what time frame do we compare? Okay, now how do we fix the factors to calculate the greenhouse gas emissions based on the power that you're using? So I mean, this is in essence the point of discussion for the calculation. Colleagues, please correct me or compliment me if I say something stupid, because I'm not an expert on energy storage. But yeah.
Well, just to say that we would welcome if you have comments, like combined comments from the association, like whether the methodology, well, at the moment we are still discussing 3 different approaches. We haven't decided yet, and that's the point of discussion today. But if you, like, we welcome the opposition basically on those approaches that really practical approach. Is it a fair approach for the first call? For the second call, we will see. We apply this methodology for the first call, but just focus on what we are proposing now, and yeah, we can indeed set up even a dedicated meeting in a smaller group to discuss this further. So yeah, that is very well.
We will come back to you on this because I think we need to deep dive into these detailed questions and have this experience also from the ground from forward.
Having a forum that would be very interesting because we have tried to assess the GHG on different models, but we don't always align with the financial side, mainly EAB, because they don't know sometimes. So it would be interesting to have this forum.
Just we can see how we can implement this. So there's a need, it's identified as a need to do this, but it must be manageable, so it must not be huge, but we really, some people have good knowledge to come together.
And we would call probably for you to organize that because of the timing and also our own capacity restraints.
So we're happy to support on this. That's why we're very happy to
some organized way to have that follow this process.
There are some practical questions that are popping up. For example, will there be a template? When will there be a template? And it's also a practical questions. Is it something we can reply already now? Or
what's exactly the question? How, at what point or what time frame we have to be finished our calculations or fixed it to the demands? So we have the latest in September.
Will we have a template?
Okay, so just to explain the process, the call will be opened on the website. And all the documentation will be published at the time of opening of the call. Normally, you would have an electronic application form, which would include pre-programmed templates, and which would include annexes, and some free possibilities to upload PDFs and other documentation as needed. And all that package will be published on the website. Plus, we will publish the guidance for applicants on how to fill in those templates. This is all obviously catered, and it will be published at the time of the call. Now, before the call itself, we are still trying to find out what kind of outreach activities will we do, so that we already inform the market, the sectors. Okay, the call is coming on this date. This is the website. This is it. And we may already at the time have some frequently asked questions and answers available, so that you can get in the preparatory mood before the actual call is open. Okay. Normally, we would have the call of let's say 3 months for the first stage to be or 4.
3 or 4.
Four
would be good.
To be seen, exactly.
4 would be really great. Yeah. With the summer in between and so on.
Okay, so
4
months, and so at that time, obviously, we will also will be providing mostly from INEA side a kind of dynamic help desk. So if projects promoters will find difficulty to understand the requirement or terminology or whatever, there will be help provided to the promoters, either through the frequently asked questions or in another frames. Okay, so that will be fully transparent. We will do our best to kind of provide the key information even before the opening of the call, when we will be able to do so. Otherwise, throughout that process, there will be a system whereby your answers will be your questions will be answered.
I think very helpful what's already in the existing paper are examples from where you can conduct how you may set up your article like this. That is maybe it's even more we have to work on to have maybe more examples, maybe also out from the storage group, how could the calculation be basically done.
But this we look at, we comment to that. Maybe we can take the last questions on the net also, because the time is running, it's almost 12. So we'll read them all. Maybe you can take some notes, and then we can reply to all of them in one go. There are some questions, please, Jacob, what's on you.
So first, the call will be open in mid-2020. When would we expect the awarded projects to be announced?
4 months later.
4 months later.
Hello.
And it's a closer, sorry. It's a
Okay,
closer.
let's start.
Hey, welcome.
You're right, it's a closer, you're right.
It has been mentioned that the Innovation Fund will act as VC. Will Innovation Fund retain any kind of shareholding position or political rights within the project business? Is some kind of offsetting emission compensation allowed to achieve the claimed GHG reduction? Is there a template available for application? We've answered this. Is there a minimum project size in order to be eligible for the Innovation Fund? Is it a bonus if in the evaluation for a project if the project is a consortium? And that's about it.
Okay. So one by one, award, as we said, we are opening a call for big projects. The minimum project size for this call is 7.5 million of capital expenditure, and the awards of the grant after the second stage evaluation will be roughly at the end of 2021. But for those projects that will be identified and will pass the discussion with the EIB, who will most probably provide the project development assistance, the project development assistance support will be earlier than the Q4 of 2021. This may be probably in Q1 of 2021. Yeah. So there are two awards that are coming, one for the PDA and one for the main grant. Well, I made the parallel of a venture capital investor. We will provide grants. Okay, at least in the first call, the form of support will be grants. So we will take no shareholding in the projects, but we will have a reporting framework in place. So we will check how the projects are faring, but the Commission will not own a share in the project. All rights. All rights as well. Your rights will stay with you, but you will have knowledge sharing requirements that you will need to follow to share the knowledge. Offsetting emissions.
No, the emission reductions have to be real, so no buying offsets on the market.
Minimum project size I mentioned for this first call.
And the second,
Small scale, there is no minimum. No.
But then there will be a normal cutoff of the cost per CO2 avoided. If it's too small, the cost will probably.
Exactly. And no, I don't think there will be any specific points for consortia. It's your business, how you organize yourself.
Must be a good project anyhow. So consortium must be mature, must be supported, must be.
The consortium indeed can help with the capacity of the project. It can help replicability, but there are no requirements for consortium.
But there's just one partner, let's say, in the selection. However, he's organized.
The lead partner. Good. So we have some more minutes if there are questions. Please. Yeah. And then,
I have a question on the eligibility criteria. If there are some strict eligibility criteria, I make an example. If we have an idea to develop a new strategy for low carbon energy generation, and we adopt state-of-the-art technologies, but in a panorama, for example, in off-grid areas where we usually use fossil fuels, and we adopt something more sustainable. Would that be applicable, or is that something that shall look for other kinds of financing? I think to a small island where we usually use diesel and we want to build a new grid by using solar and batteries, for example.
I think it should be possible. The eligibilities that we have in the ETS directive are that the projects must come from innovative renewables, energy storage, energy intensive industry, or CCS, CCS. Okay. And cross-cutting projects or projects that are somehow linked to those sectors. So you might have a project coming from outside of the ETS, but there must be a link with the ETS sector, either by the fact that you displace a product produced in the ETS by fossil fuels or vice versa. So in your case, if you will displace diesel engines on an island through an innovative concept, of grid management that will involve on-site renewables, you are ticking two boxes and you should be able to do it.
In this case, it's the methodology which is innovative, not the technology itself.
Okay, good. Thank you very much.
Please don't.
And sorry, there is second criteria, which I didn't mention, which is that the project must happen on the territory of the EU, Norway and Iceland.
Assessment of the GHG emissions, the cut in GHG emissions. At the stage of the, I think you call it expression of interest, is it our estimates or is it external party that needs to do the assessment? And what are the criteria for that external party?
It's a good question. We don't have an answer yet. We are working on this.
You mentioned that
For the second group for smaller projects, will the criteria be the same?
The criteria will be the same, the 5 selection criteria. What will be different is that we will not have two-stage procedure. So we will simplify the call for small-scale projects. There will be a single stage, single evaluation by the same criteria.
Please.
How is the GHG calculation indexed to the trading system, the carbon trading? How is the price vary because it's related? Is it clear what I'm saying? Or basically, you have a euros per ton, and that will be part of the financial model. And the euros per ton depends on the country, I assume. So, and it's related to the trading system, not to this trading, CO2 trading.
Well, there are some considerations already in the discussion papers on what should be the basis, because this will mostly impact the relevant cost calculation.
Yeah.
Exactly. So, what carbon price bracket you should use? Historical, future forwards. Where do you stand when you're calculating this?
Who funds that? That's the
So,
most important.
also on that one, we would welcome your feedback, but we have some assumptions provided already in the discussion paper.
Please.
I'm from the Italian transmission system operator, Terna. Just a clarification about the call. Will it be targeted to technologies or also to application? For example, in the storage field, would be eligible a virtual storage plant, for example, that we could demonstrate that we will integrate it more RES and so reducing greenhouse gas emissions. This kind of project could be possible.
Yes, that would be eligible. You need to define the boundaries of the project and to be able to control the boundaries of the project. This is what you're coming for. And because afterwards you will need to demonstrate performance as well over 3 to 10 years. But yes, it is possible virtual storage power plant if you want.
Good. If this is the last question, we still have 4 minutes left, but we fine to close now if there's no more question. Is there still one from the net? No? Good. So thank you very much to the Commission. Thanks for the consultants and the participants to come here. And thanks to the team who organized this. Thank you very much. We will see some of you tomorrow afternoon.
Yes. Last, exactly, tomorrow afternoon, the public session, please watch. It will be online. And yes, let's stay in touch. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you.